Suffering touches every life, from the death of a loved one, to wars that decimate nations, to quiet personal grief. It's everywhere, and with it comes one of humanity's oldest and deepest questions. If God exists, and is both all-good and all-powerful, why is there so much suffering in the world? This question isn't just philosophical, it's personal, emotional. It forces us to confront the kind of universe we live in, and what, if anything, lies beyond it. This is Wisdom Aporia, and today we will explore the problem of evil. The ancient Greek philosopher Epicurus famously put it this way: "Is God willing to prevent evil, but not able? Then he is not omnipotent. Is he able, but not willing? Then he is malevolent. Is he both able and willing? Then whence cometh evil?" This is what philosophers call the problem of evil. And today we're going to explore it in depth, not to answer it once and for all, but to understand why it's so powerful and what people, theists and non-theists alike, have said in response. At its heart, the problem of evil challenges the very compatibility of God and suffering. It takes the traditional view of God, that he is omnipotent, all-powerful, omniscient, all-knowing, and omnibenevolent, all-good, and asks, how could such a being allow a world like ours? We need to distinguish two types of evil. First, there's moral evil, suffering caused by human actions, murder, war, abuse, betrayal, evil that flows from choice. Second, there's natural evil, suffering caused by no one in particular. Earthquakes, cancer, drought, events that seem built into the fabric of nature itself. Philosophers also separate two versions of the problem, the logical problem and the evidential problem. The logical problem argues that God's existence is logically incompatible with evil. The evidential problem concedes that it's possible God and evil could coexist, but the sheer amount and intensity of suffering makes it highly unlikely. As philosopher William Rowe once wrote, some suffering just seems pointless, especially when it affects children or innocents. This forces us to ask, what kind of God would allow this? Over the centuries, theologians and philosophers have developed various responses. These are not proofs, they're called theodicies and defenses, attempts to show that belief in God can remain rational, even in a world with evil. Perhaps the most famous defense argues that evil is the price of freedom. God created humans with the ability to choose, to love, to act, to create. But real freedom means the possibility of choosing evil. Without that risk, virtue wouldn't be meaningful. This was championed by St. Augustine and revived in modern times by Alvin Plantinga. They argue that a world with free beings who sometimes choose evil may be better than a world of robotic perfection. But it has limits. What about natural evil? Tsunamis, cancer. Can freedom explain that? John Hick's soul-making Theodicy suggests that suffering is necessary for growth. In this view, Earth isn't paradise. It's a kind of training ground for the soul. We grow through struggle, develop moral character, and learn compassion, things that couldn't exist in a painless world. Pain, in this sense, becomes a teacher, but this view raises questions too. Why so much pain? And why is it so unevenly distributed? Some believe that all suffering serves a greater purpose, even if we don't see it. Much like how a child might not understand a painful medical treatment, we may not see the ultimate goods that evil allows. This is sometimes called skeptical theism, the idea that our limited perspective can't grasp God's plan, but it can feel dismissive. Is it enough to say, we can't know? Does that comfort the mother holding her dying child? These defenses help some and frustrate others, which is why many look not just to philosophy but to religion. Religions have long confronted the reality of suffering. Often they offer not explanations but frames, ways to endure, interpret, and live through it. In Judaism, suffering is woven into the very identity of the people. The book of Job doesn't solve the problem of evil, it deepens it. Job loses everything, health, family, home, and cries out in despair. God responds not with comfort, but with awe-inspiring questions. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? In Jewish thought, to question God is not blasphemy, it's faith in action. The name Israel literally means one who wrestles with God. In Christianity, God does not remain distant from suffering. He enters it. Through Jesus, God takes on human pain, even death. The crucifixion becomes a paradox. God's greatest act of love is also his greatest moment of suffering. The resurrection doesn't erase suffering, it reframes it. Pain becomes part of a redemptive story. In Islam, suffering is often viewed as a test, a trial that brings the faithful closer to God. The Quran says, "With hardship comes ease." The story of Ayub, Job, is retold with emphasis on sabr, patience and submission to divine will. Faith here lies not in avoiding pain, but in bearing it with trust. In Buddhism, suffering, or dukkha, is the beginning of wisdom. The first noble truth states plainly, life is suffering. But instead of blaming God, Buddhism encourages self-awareness and release from desire. Suffering is not something to question, it's something to understand. In this view, transformation comes not through divine justice, but inner awakening. For many atheists and humanists, the problem of evil is the strongest argument against belief in God. They point to atrocities like the Holocaust, the death of innocent children, or generations living in systemic poverty, and ask, how can any loving, powerful being allow this? Writers like Albert Camus and Fyodor Dostoevsky famously rejected easy answers. Dostoevsky, through his character Ivan Karamazov, says he might believe in God, but he refuses the ticket to a universe that justifies suffering. Humanists, instead, focus on our responsibility to reduce pain. If God is absent, then it's us who must stand up for justice, compassion, and healing. So can God and suffering coexist? Maybe, maybe not. The problem of evil remains one of the most haunting, profound, and human questions ever asked. For some, it destroys belief. For others, it deepens it. And for many, it sits like a stone in the soul, not solved, but carried. What's certain is that no view, theistic or atheistic, makes suffering easy. There are no shortcuts through pain. But in the asking, in the struggling, in the search for meaning, perhaps that's where the real wisdom lies. Because some questions aren't meant to be answered. They're meant to be lived. This is Wisdom Aporia, where we chase answers and find better questions.